How's it going?
Good evening, everyone. I'm very excited to be here with you tonight, especially because it is St. Patrick's Day. I hope you've all been listening to Irish music today and cooking Irish food like good Americans. I was not listening to Irish music today, which is kind of counter to my own personal tradition. You can ask Andy. I listen to Irish music a lot, probably more than I should. There's a particular artist called Seth Staten Watkins who does really, really nice covers of basically historical Irish songs and Irish fighting songs, and they're a lot of fun to listen to. They sound almost like sea shanties. If you haven't heard of him, Seth Staten Watkins, very talented singer. Anyway, I wanted to start with this as our actual opener because this was so interesting to me. I tweeted out, "I love how our government puts so much emphasis on nature programs." And this image says, "Did you know you can hunt for gems in designated U.S. parks? Research Ruby Ridge." This other part says, "The U.S. Forest Service needs your help. Research Operation Northwoods." And this last one says, "The U.S. government has an extensive bird protection plan. Research Project Mockingbird." If you guys are familiar with any of these, you guys know that Ruby Ridge was a huge failure of the U.S. government, incredible authoritarian overreach against private citizens in Idaho in 1992. I'm less familiar with Operation Northwoods, but that was where basically the U.S. government was planning in the 60s to blame Cuba for acts of terrorism in order to start a war with Cuba, which is very interesting to think about all the other wars we've been involved in that were based on acts of terrorism in the past, but we won't go down that rabbit trail today. And then this last one, Project Mockingbird, was where Kennedy decided he wanted to figure out who was leaking, and he planned to wiretap journalists' conversations. So that's a lot of fun. Definitely go to my Twitter and share that with your friends, people who still blindly trust the government. There's a lot more where that came from. That's literally just 3 different instances. You guys could point them in the direction of Waco, which personally makes my blood boil even more than Ruby Ridge. There's a lot. You could talk about MK Ultra. It's not even a conspiracy theory. We legitimately know this stuff happened. We just don't know the full extent. So today we're going to be talking about some of that governmental failure and overreach with the Hunter Biden laptop case. We're going to be talking about Joe Biden actually being offensive to Irish people, which Andy disagrees with me on. I was offended. I'm way more Irish than he is, so his opinion doesn't count today. We're going to talk about trad wives and what the media thinks about that. Guess what they think about that? They don't think it's great. And we're also going to read an op-ed from the judge who was given essentially a struggle session at Stanford University just a week or so ago. But I wanted to open with this actual opening article from the Daily Mail, which is "Scientists discover a way of drastically cutting risk of kids becoming allergic to peanuts." I'm going to stop right here and say, do you guys know what it is? Because I knew what it was when I was like 12 years old. I was like, well, if this is a problem, why aren't we doing this thing? And it turns out I was correct. And this is a little bit like exposure therapy, and we've been treating peanuts like trigger warnings. So let's read a little bit of this. Very interesting to me. Definitely something that we'll be keeping in mind. They have kits to help manage allergies. Introducing peanuts at 4 to 6 months can reduce allergy attacks by 77%. So you're telling me that we shouldn't have been mollycoddling our children this entire time? That's crazy. I had no idea. Parents should introduce their children to peanut products from as young as 4 months old to prevent them from developing allergies, experts say. The number of people suffering from allergic reactions to peanuts has risen 3-fold in recent decades, and in severe cases, the consequences can be deadly. About 1 in 50 children are now affected, leading to a lifetime of worries about ingredients in their food, and that does kind of suck. I feel for them. But UK researchers have discovered a window of opportunity between the ages of 4 and 6 months, which they say is the best time to introduce babies to peanuts. And doing this could reduce peanut allergy influences by as much as 77%. That's crazy. The team from King's College London and the University of Southampton said most peanut allergies have already developed by the time a child turns 1. They looked at data from the Inquiring About Tolerance, EAT, and Learning Early About Peanut Allergy, LEAP, studies. The LEAP study followed 640 babies considered high risk of developing peanut allergies and examined early introduction to peanut products. The EAT project saw more than 1,300 3-month-old babies recruited in England and Wales. They were tracked over several years to investigate the early introduction of 6 allergenic foods: milk, peanuts, sesame, fish, egg, and wheat. Analysis published in the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology revealed it was best to introduce peanut products to babies at 4 to 6 months of age. Good to know. Great news. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the way peanuts are ostracized in American public schools, but they literally have policies in some of these schools that you cannot bring any kind of peanut product into the school at all. That's crazy to me. So to me, this really reminds me of the way we try to treat all of this stuff with kid gloves. Like, we have the microaggressions, we have the trigger warnings, we have the content warnings, and all it does is make people weaker. And I think I told you guys yesterday about how I have this theory that humans need things to be challenging in order to really thrive. And I think this really confirms my theory. And this is actually something that Jordan Peterson talks about a lot as well, not in the instance of peanuts because he's not a medical professional, but he talks about how you want to expose someone who is, for example, terrified of elevators to an elevator little by little until they feel like they can handle the concept of being around an elevator. And then you gradually have them maybe push the button to open the door. They can kind of see how it works, get a feel for it. They don't have to go in yet, but they're just getting a little bit closer. You have to do it very slowly and very gradually. There's such a fine and interesting line here between liberal and conservative mindsets, because liberals would say we need to protect everyone from all of this stuff all the time, and conservatives would say no way, just flip them into the pool, get it over with. There's no need to mollycoddle anyone. But the fine center truth is that you need to introduce people to this kind of thing slowly. You need to be kind about it, but you do need to do it. So it's very interesting to me, like, we need to find this middle ground between shoving someone into it and protecting them from it at all costs. Neither way is really going to work. I just thought the article was super interesting about peanuts because I have friends who are now having kids and they're like, oh, well, I'm going to start introducing my kid to like this allergy kit when they're, 4 months old. And then we'll see how they do with that. And then we'll introduce another thing. So you introduce them one at a time and you make sure they're not having a bad reaction. And of course, you loop in your pediatrician or whatever and try to make sure that you have proper support to make sure you aren't injuring your child. But let's read this article from Stuart Kyle Duncan, whom you may recall from the Stanford struggle session at the law school there. A dean voices pride that students are being taught to stage tantrums rather than make a reasoned case. Really looking forward to this article for sure. Stanford Law School's website touts its collegial culture in which collaboration and the open exchange of ideas are essential to life and learning. Then there's the culture I experienced when I visited Stanford last week. I'd been invited by the student chapter of the Federalist Society to discuss the U.S. Court of Appeals on the Fifth Circuit, on which I've served since 2018, so he is Trump appointed. I've spoken at law schools across the country, and I was glad to accept this invitation. One of my first clerks graduated from Stanford. I have a friend in the faculty. I gave a talk there a few years ago and found it a warm and engaging place, but not this time. When I arrived, the walls were festooned with posters denouncing me for crimes against women, gays, blacks, and, quote, trans people, close quote. Plastered everywhere were photos of the students who had invited me and flyers declaring "you should be ashamed" with their last word in a large red capital letters and a horror movie font. This didn't seem collegial. Walking to the building where I would deliver my talk, I could hear loud chanting a good 50 yards away, reminiscent of a tent revival in its intensity. Interesting religious parallel. Some 100 students were massed outside the classroom as I entered, faces painted every color of the rainbow, waving signs and banners, jeering and stamping and howling. As I entered the classroom, one protester screamed, "We hope your daughters get sexually assaulted." Nice people. I had been warned a few days before about a possible protest, but Stanford administrators assured me they were on top of it, that Stanford's policies permitted protests but not disruption. They weren't, quote, on top of it. Before my talk started, the mob flooded the room. Banners unfurled, signs brandished, Fed suck, Trans Lives Matter, this one upside down, very well organized protesters, and others that can't be quoted in a family newspaper. A nervous dog, literally a canine, was in the front row, fur striped with paint. Oh, I feel bad for the dog. A man with a frozen smile approached me, identified himself as the dean of student engagement, and asked, "You doing okay?" I don't remember what I said. Sounds kind of traumatic. The protesters weren't upset by the subject of my talk, a rather dry discourse on how circuit courts interact with the Supreme Court in times of doctrinal flux. Wow, that is dry. Holy cow. Rather, I was their target. While in practice, I represented clients and advanced arguments that protesters hate. For instance, I defended Louisiana's traditional marriage law. As for my judicial decisions, among the several hundred I've written, the protesters were especially vexed by U.S. v. Varner, a federal prisoner serving a term for attempted receipt of child explicit content, and within a previous state conviction for possession of said content, petitioned our court to order that he be called by feminine pronouns. As my opinion explained, the federal court cannot control what pronouns people use. The Stanford protesters saw it differently. My opinion had denied a trans woman's experience. So he said a federal court can't control what pronouns people use, and they said that this judge had denied a trans woman's existence. That is a far stretch at best. Guys, these people are the products of one of the top higher education institutions in the country. These are the people who will be lawmakers, they will be judges, they will be lawyers, they will be at the highest level of liberal education, and this is how they're acting. I'm very impressed. I'm very pleased with how higher education is going. When the Federalist Society president tried to introduce me, the heckling began. The Federalist Society, you suck, is pleased to welcome Judge Kyle Duncan. You're not welcome here. We hate you. He was appointed by President Trump to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. Embarrassing, and so on. As I began, the heckling continued. Try delivering a speech while being jeered every third word. This was an utter farce, a staged public shaming. I stopped, pleaded with these students to stop the stream of insults, which only made them louder, and asked if administrators were present. Very interesting. Enter Tyrion Steinbach, Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. I'm so glad she was there. Ms. Steinbach and, I later learned, other administrators were watching from the periphery. She hadn't introduced herself to me. She asked to address the students. Something fell off. I asked her to tell the students their infantile behavior was inappropriate. She insisted she wanted to talk to all of us. Whereupon Ms. Steinbach opened a folio, took out a printed sheaf of papers, and delivered a 6-minute speech addressing the question, is the juice worth the squeeze? Fascinating phraseology. What could that mean? While the students rhythmically snapped, Ms. Steinbach attempted to explain. My work, she said, has caused harm. It feels abhorrent and literally denies the humanity of people. My presence put Ms. Steinbach in a tough spot, she said, because her job is to create a space of belonging for all people at Stanford. She assured me I was absolutely welcome in this space because me and many people in the administration do absolutely believe in free speech. I didn't feel welcome. Who would? And she repeated the cryptic question, is the juice worth the squeeze? I asked again what she meant, and she finally put the question plainly. Was my talk worth the pain this causes and the division that this causes? Again, one of the top liberal arts colleges in the world, because this is in the U.S., and the U.S. is supposedly at the top of their game. Amazing. Again, she asserted her belief in free speech before equivocating. I understand why people feel the harm is so great that we might need to reconsider these policies, and luckily, they're in a school where they can learn the advocacy skills to advocate for these changes. Then she turned the floor back over to me, while hoping I could learn too and listen through your partisan lens, the hyper-political lens. Talk about projection. In closing, she said, I look out and I don't ask what's going on here. I look out and I say, I'm glad this is going on here. This is on video and the entire event is on audio in case you're wondering. The mob's leader, a young woman, then addressed the crowd. I want to ask the half the folk walk out to protest and the rest of us, let's tone down the heckling slightly so he can get to our questions. I didn't see how I could continue, so after the partial walkout, I dispensed with my prepared remarks and opened the floor. That went poorly, and the plainly hostile questions were the least of it. Students hurled abuse, including vile sexual innuendo. Some filed past me spitting insults, like, you're scum. 2 U.S. Marshals decided it was time to escort me out. So he was who they decided to get rid of. 2 days later, Jenny Martinez and Mark Tessier-Lavigne, respectively, the law school's dean and the university's president, formally apologized, confirming that protesters and administrators had violated Stanford policy. I'm grateful and I accept it. The matter hasn't dropped, though. This week, nearly 1/3 of Stanford law students continued to protest. 1/3 of the students at the top law school in the country. I have to reiterate that. I just have to. Higher education is lost. You will not change my mind on this count. And Stanford is just the latest example. I remember when this happened at Yale with Nicholas Christakis over the case of freaking Halloween costumes. You guys remember that? A student full on screamed at him in the public square, literally the public square, talking about how this was a home to her and he did not understand where she was coming from because she was supposed to feel comfortable all the time. And the fact that he allowed students to wear whatever costume they wanted was making her feel like she didn't belong there. These are the people, the leaders of the future. This is the world of tomorrow. What a brave new world, as far as I'm concerned. Hey, student Stuart, thank you very much for your super chat. Reparations for leprechauns, very much appreciated. For sure. We appreciate that indeed. Guys, you have to invest in Dippin' Dot coin. It is the biggest mover and shaker. It is going to the moon, I assure you. They thrive on their snacks. We should put dip on the front and dot on the back, I think. What do you guys think about that? I think it'd be a lot of fun. The most disturbing aspect of this shameful debacle is what it says about the state of legal education. Stanford is an elite law school. So was Yale. The protesters showed not the foggiest grasp of the basic concepts of legal discourse, that one must meet reason with reason, not power. That jeering contempt is the opposite of persuasion, that the laws protect the speaker from the mob, not the mob from the speaker. Worst of all, Ms. Steinbach's remarks made clear she is proud that Stanford students are being taught that this is the way law should be. I don't know about you guys, but I'm personally terrified about the future, given that these are the people who are going to dispense of our legal proceedings down the road. That's horrific. These are the people who will decide if parents get to keep their children once CPS takes them because they decided not to trans them. Just like to let that sink in. I've been criticized in the media for getting angry at the protesters. It's true, I call them appalling idiots, bullies, and hypocrites. I mean, was he wrong? They are, and I won't apologize for saying so. Sometimes anger is the proper response to vicious behavior. I think that's fully fair. Judge Duncan serves on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, and here he is trying to give a speech about justice being protested by people saying your rulings don't rule us, we don't want your judgment, your opinion off campus, and they're trying to break down his pedestal. Crazy, crazy, crazy stuff. This kind of thing is really kind of demoralizing because it's just such a consistent pattern, and this is part of the reason that I have such a very, very low opinion of higher education. Now, before I started working with Timcast IRL, I was attending community college. I was going for surgical tech, and I was also coincidentally doing the prerequisites for a nursing program. I probably could have gotten into a really good one because I had really good grades. I worked really hard. I was surrounded by people of all ages who were going back to school typically as adults. Many of them had kids, younger, older. I made great friends with a lady whose daughter at the time was, I want to say 13 or 14. And she and I vibed really well. We studied together. We got a lot done together. And we were also joined by an older divorcee who was probably in her mid 50s, early 60s. And we were all on the exact same path. We were moving toward the same goal. We were in the same class, and we were just totally oriented toward the right things. And that really felt like a wonderful scholastic experience because it didn't matter what my classmates thought about the world. Now, one of them went to church, one of them didn't make a difference. None of that mattered. We only cared about learning anatomy and physiology and some of the other stuff that we were also taking together. And that was fantastic, but that was a community college. This wasn't this high, fancy, higher education, all this other nonsense. It wasn't legal school. It was nothing. We weren't the elite. I'll put it that way. And I think the possibly the biggest issue with higher education right now is that it is possessed by the intelligentsia. That's what Thomas Sowell used to call them. The people who think that they have the best and brightest ideas, the people who are utopian and push all other ideas to the side in the name of pursuing their own personal utopian ideals. Now, people who go to school to pursue an actual end goal of obtaining a career, not pursuing fame or accolades or some high degree of notoriety like a lawyer or a judge or some other high legal person, like I assume these Stanford students want, because their parents are paying through the nose or the government is subsidizing them to a huge degree. to make sure that they have that name recognition and that clout of Stanford. To me, that's really what kind of makes this especially toxic, because you see the most flagrant examples of this at places like Yale and places like Stanford. Genuinely disturbing to me. And it's very, very troubling because they still hold so much sway over the whole legal system, like entirely. Like the only college that I know of that's actually breaking out of this mold successfully is a college called Hillsdale, which accepts absolutely zero federal funds. Now, there are others that don't accept any federal funds, but they also lack credentials. Like you can't transfer any of your credits to anywhere else. Hillsdale seems to offer, it's highly competitive. It's actually very elite because it is so competitive, and not in the way that Yale and Stanford are. You guys should check out Hillsdale if you're not familiar with it. They are like I think they have the Christian background. I think it's Protestant background. It's certainly not Catholic, but they are really doing amazing things, and they're kind of bucking trends like Stanford and Yale are bringing us, unfortunately. Let me see what you guys are thinking. Andy, I'm sure, will give me a little bit of pushback on that because he thinks that higher education is a great idea. I think in theory it is as well. But again, my experience with it was much better than what these Stanford students are promoting. Andy says, is it offensive to leprechauns, or are leprechauns offensive to you? Leprechauns are not offensive to me, but I'm just saying you've clearly never heard a leprechaun in real life before. All right, yes, thank you so much for the hot sauce, FSU Villy. We really appreciate that. Andy uses it literally every single day. I'm constantly like, oh my gosh, eat something without hot sauce, but he refuses. All right, hello, JJR. Appreciate that. Glad you could join us, everybody. All right, you guys, biblically accurate leprechaun. Yes, indeed. We do have a lot of Irish out here. That's why we're going to try to go to the Irish Day Parade. Let's see. This will also be the day of my birth for my youngest sibling. We had dubbed him the Mexican leprechaun, even though he's roughly 6'1". That's amazing. I'm very glad to hear that. I have friends whose child was born today. She has very, very curly red hair. She's adorable, but she's Scottish. Very interesting. All right, let's hear. Andy says, with her, it's JBP, Akira the Don, and Irish Jigs. That is correct. I do love Akira the Don. He has incredibly meaningful music. He remixed Jocko Willink talking about like grief. Crazy, crazy, very deep, very thought-provoking. He does remix Jordan B. Peterson as well. He remixes David Goggins, if you're feeling particularly savage and want to run 13 miles before 3 a.m., FSU says, toss in some mariachi music. Mariachi music and Irish music is a great combination for sure. Andy says, Northwoods, all the chiefs of staff signed off on actually killing American citizens and blaming it on Cuba. Kennedy refused not long before he was assassinated. Fascinating indeed. Unheil Snipes says, howdy from Tucson. Sorry I'm late. I'm sorry you're late as well. I'm glad you're here now. If anyone else told that joke, you wouldn't give a flying bagpipe. We're going to talk about Joe Biden saying he's not Irish because he's sober. Moving on. Greg Duvier says, but it is St. Patrick's Day. We are all Irish. Indeed we are. Stuart says, I was born in Ireland. Very cool. And as I understand, Stuart is also over there in... Andy says, everyone kiss Stuart. From my understanding, he is still over there in Scotland. I have a pal over in Scotland too. It seems like a great place to be. Unfortunately, incredibly censorious, even more so than here. Anyone that can go down to buy a peanut probably shouldn't be here. We don't like weak people. It's not that we don't like weak people. It's that nature doesn't like weak people. And if we're ever in a situation where ish hits the fan, we need to be able to eat peanuts because peanut butter is an incredible source of nutrition, protein, fat, and all that good stuff to really keep you running if things do go downhill. Hello, hero. Introduction to things should be, while slowly being kind about it sounds very libertarian to me. No, because they have to be introduced to it. Like you don't get an option, unfortunately. You just have to be nice about it. You have to be kind of compassionate about it. That actually sounds very feminine to me. It sounds like mom should be the one introducing like these foods to kids because you do it in a very soft, very gentle way and you make sure that you're not going to traumatize them about it. That's the first step. Andy says, J6 prisoners are being transferred just before GOP inspection. Fascinating. Let's read that article. Andy shared a link with us. I think if I don't crash Opera, that's my current browser, that would be good to cover too. All right, that'll be our last article we talk about today if we get to it in time. All right, thank you again, Stuart, for your super chat. The Intelligentsia, that's correct. Zach. If you haven't read Thomas Sowell, I beseech you to read some of his work. He has basic economics. That's probably the best place to start. But he has tons of other stuff, and all of his work is incredibly simple, clear-cut, very philosophically reasoned, very meaningful. He's a highly impactful thinker, and I strongly recommend him for sure. Zach says, fun fact, St. Patrick wasn't Irish. He was a Catholic priest who went to Ireland and converted them. That I have heard as well, but I don't really care. The point kind of is just of Irish heritage, which I appreciate for sure. And he says, $.chain rockets. Yes, that's right. Dip rocket is the new hot ish coin. Academia is not lost. This was their plan all along. I dealt with CRT or something like it 30 years ago. Thank you for that, Greg, for sure. I appreciate that. Andy and I have been going back and forth about higher education for a while. I appreciate and respect what theoretically, ideally, higher education was supposed to look like. What I would have hoped it would have looked like was like pointing people in the right direction and teaching them to ask questions, teaching them to be curious about everything and really be engaged with the world in a way that makes the world a better place. Call me utopian, but it does seem like they've certainly been co-opted, and I fully chalk that up to the, I think it's called the Frankfurt School, if I recall correctly. I know some of the names involved with that was Herbert Marcuse was one of them, and some of the other guys. I don't think Marx was directly involved with that, but there were a lot of guys who were just like awful for American education, and they came over, I think, from France and Germany, even though it was Frankfurt School. I need to read more about that, though. I would highly recommend checking out James Lindsay's commentary on that because he's got the goods. All right, you guys, we're going to talk about housewives, homemaking over hustle culture. Critics claim TikTok's viral trad wife movement, quote, romanticizes sexism. Oh, no. Some say the lifestyle is a way to push back against post-COVID burnout. Very interesting. Donning elaborate dresses, fastening an apron around their waist, and popping in their finest pearl earrings, or at least some iteration of pearls, for another round of household chores or cooking, more and more young women are following in the footsteps of the quintessential mid-century housewife thanks to the latest TikTok trend. But while some women are eager to shirk all the hustle and bustle of today's corporate world and channel Barbara Billingsley as June Cleaver, others are none too happy with the trend. Of course, because feminism is not actually about allowing women to do whatever they want. Because if it was, you wouldn't have people saying we should never allow women the option to stay at home and raise children, because if we do, that's all they'll choose to do, as some feminists did say at the time. The new trend for submissive women has a dark heart and history, read one headline from The Guardian. In 2020, I might add. So they've been at it for a while. We're going to look at that article too. An article from Hype Bay slammed the videos as disturbing, writing they typically feature a cis straight white woman longing for the 50s, an era where some women could opt out to participate out of participation in the corporate world and be a stay-at-home mother instead. No, let's get our history right. Women didn't enter the workforce en masse until probably about the 70s. Before that, a majority of women did stay home. Yes, even Black women. Yes, even gender-confused women. And a third from Grazia magazine accused the trend of romanticizing an era where sexism and racism ruled. What a bunch of jerks. But those following the trend tell a different story. A trad wife, short for traditional wife, according to TikToker Estee Williams, is a woman who prefers to take a traditional or ultra-traditional role in marriage, including the beliefs that a woman's place is in the home. Almost like a woman choosing to do what she wants to do with her life. Fascinating, must be stopped. While these women channel the structure of a stereotypical 1950s household in which the husband goes to work while the wives stay home and cook, clean, and care for children, those behind the trend say it's so much more, particularly in the age of burnout, and struggle to maintain a work-life balance in the post-COVID age. I can respect it. This is a vintage illustration of a fashionable housewife standing in front of her new pink kitchen, 1957. It doesn't mean that we are trying to take away what women fought for, Williams said in a TikTok video from September. There are a lot of people trying to take the sinister thing or put some other darker meaning behind the term trad wife. Nobody's doing that. No trad wife TikToker is saying every woman's place is in the home. We as individuals are just choosing to be homemakers. That's all. And again, feminism says you should be able to do that, right? Technically. Williams argues that being a trad wife is not a movement, but rather a lifestyle. She also, in her September TikTok, argued that those behind the lifestyle don't see women as less important than men just because they're submissive to their husbands. I think we should probably figure out what submissive means because I think people really misunderstand it. Other videos aligning with the tradwife hashtag show women baking, sweeping floors, and trying on mid-century style dresses as they rave about the liberating transition from their old way of life to their new one. Others focus on the biblical implications of being a homemaker and how being a tradwife allows them to fulfill the role. But even some who keep traditional values say the community is in some way becoming problematic. TikToker Madison Dastrup, who formerly aligned with tradwife lifestyle, says it grew too problematic for her after extremism hijacked the community. Oh no. I got my start on TikTok by making tradwife content and videos. However, I do not consider myself a tradwife anymore. I don't associate myself with the term. While I still consider myself traditional and I still hold on to those traditional values, I do not associate myself with that community. Dastrop, a stay-at-home mom of two, said extremists within the community tried to lean in on certain bigoted views, including white supremacy. Interesting. Of course, with all things, you're going to have extremists in every little corner of the internet, and the extremists within the tradwife community really just started taking over the entire community as a whole, condoning white supremacy and the R word, which is marital sexual assault, that I will not say because TikTok will take my video down, the R word in marriage. Things like that I do not agree with whatsoever. Well, that makes sense. Exactly why I left the traditional movement after 2 years, wrote another. I hold a lot of old values, but I also don't hold a lot of old values. And that's fine. I think that's fully fair. I think that Fox has written, and Fox has noted an interesting trend because I think that the tradwife movement is very, very ripe for being hijacked, unfortunately, by extremist movements. And I will be the first to say that extremist movements are really a thing. We have Antifa on the left, but we also have the alt-right, which doesn't get a lot of attention from the right wing because Antifa is so much more active and doing so much more actual harm in the world right now. But the alt-right really is a problem, and that's actually something Andy and I were just talking about earlier today. We were talking about how it is possible for people to truly believe that one race is superior to another. Mysterious to me. I personally don't care at all about any of that stuff, but I know personally people who do. And it still doesn't make sense to me. And I've known them for years and they just continue to believe the same things. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? So, well, I will say that I think my analysis is fair because feminism is supposed to enable women to do, quote, whatever they want. Now, here they are doing traditional things and it's a horrible thing because they're cis white women. Oh my gosh. And they're trying to channel racism or whatever. Give me a break. Just let women do what they want. We're not in the 50s anymore. They're not actually being racist or sexist. They're just living life as they see fit. But on the other hand, there actually is kind of this undercurrent of this grasping for a return to actual, yes, sexism and a desire to control and manipulate women by their husbands, which kind of stinks. But at the same time, if you understand human nature, which the left does not, but I truly believe the right does, you should consider for a moment that humans are going to do bad things if they are in any situation in which it's possible for them to do bad things. And I mean, we live in a free country, theoretically. We live in a country where most things are available for us to do if we think they are something that we should do, like live in a certain way. So I think that it shouldn't surprise anybody that this might be slightly hijacked by extremists. It's just something to watch out for. It's something to be aware of. And I certainly don't think this should undercut any of the actual traditional values that these women hold. I think that they should be able to pursue whatever they want to pursue. But you know that the left-wing media is going to take these extreme examples and paint it onto everything as a whole. And they're just going to assume it's all really evil and everyone involved in this is awful. But we know that's not the case. We know it's just a few bad apples. Thank you so much, Stuart. Do not thank me for Super Chat. Thank the leprechauns. They are all putting their gold in Dippin' Coin. LOL. Very wise investment. I never knew leprechauns were such wise investors, and I appreciate that. Whisper says, higher education can be great. My cousin was in a nursing program at U of A in Tucson. She never even had a professor. She left the program because of that. Wow. What? That's crazy. Username says it was an absolute waste of time and money. College should not be allowed to force gen ed and just let people take classes related to their majors. I entirely agree. There's a lot of completely unnecessary classes being forced on people if they want to graduate. I actually knew a young gentleman who lost a girlfriend because she took a class that informed her that her boyfriend at the time, was evil, and she broke up with him as a result. And I'm assuming that was like back in 2015. And I think that was when I started to notice that was so deeply inculcated in the education system, just because I heard it personally from someone who was like, yeah, this actually happened to me. I was like, that's crazy. It's only going to get worse. I was right. And he says the government can't subsidize anything, the taxpayer does. That's exactly correct. The government does not have any money. They can print it or they can tax it. Those are their only sources of income. It's not like they're contributing to society. JJR says humanities courses are another area I don't like, where they are forced into an engineering or science degree, another waste for sure. There's a lot of waste, and this is because these programs are subsidized and there are endowments for them. So they just do whatever the heck they want because they can. Like, why would they not? It makes perfect sense to me, but it's such a waste of everyone's time. Ought to be illegal, I dare say. Username says, I graduated in 2016 and do feel my education was worth it, but most of that came from the online university that was self-paced. Interesting. There are certainly different ways to do it, and I'm glad we have some different options. Like, for instance, I was really glad that I went to a community college instead of trying to get into a more expensive school, because I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do. I just wanted to get like the groundwork of science so I could kind of see what I wanted to go into, partly just because I worked in a hospital at the time and I had that background of working in a hospital. Andy says Thomas Sowell is not allowed to die. I agree. Greg says, I appreciate any white pills I can find these days. Yeah, for sure. Well, I personally am glad there are lots of women who have decided that traditional wifery is for them. I think that's awesome. I think this has really been unexplored ever since the beginning of feminism, and I think it's about time for women to realize that it's very important. Andy says, yes, the Frankfurt School Marxized our higher education system and trickled their ideas very intentionally down to every teacher's master's program, HR department, humanities, social sciences, etc. Yes. He goes on to say, but as JBP points out, the modern university system can trace its roots directly back to monasteries, and the history of Western civilization itself would be nowhere without any such institutions. Without higher learning, there's no modern science to speak of, no industrial revolution, no technological revolution. Even the American Revolution couldn't have happened without such scholars. That's fine. I agree. This is kind of where we disagree, because Andy still maintains that this is the heart of higher education. I think we've lost it entirely. I think it's totally gone. I think it's completely been co-opted, and it needs an absolute revival. It needs all of its endowment seized, and it needs to be taken back down to the ground and started again, maybe from a monastery. Who knows what happens over the next 20 years? We'll see. Zach says, I heard a YouTuber say his wife was at home on her second floor apartment. She heard a noise and looked on the window and saw a guy climbing up the building. She screamed and threw a platter at his head. Wow. So trad wives are not defenseless, especially if you're at home. You have all kinds of weapons and tools within your reach when you're at home. You literally have everything you need at home. You can surely defend yourself well, even if you don't have direct access to actual weapons. Zach says Andy says we really need common sense platter control. She could have killed that guy. Agreed, for sure. Username says ban all fully automatic assault platters. I agree, for sure. JJR says Aaron Carey discussed the financial incentive higher education institutions have to include all of the bullcrap classes. That's right. That's right, indeed. Randy says, my wife was happier when she didn't work. I've heard that too, for sure. I've heard that the perfect spot for women, like childbearing age women, is to have a part-time job and then to be most of the time at home with their families. I think that's probably a really good spot to be in. That way you can be kind of pursuing your own personal career goals, bring in a little extra money, also spending the majority of your time with your family. I think that's a great idea. JJR says basically approximately double the time and cost of a degree. Yeah, exactly. I agree. Well, we'll see if Andy changes his mind over time. I understand that it has very important, very deep roots that we should probably try to get back to. How about that? We can agree that we should go back to that for sure. Bring back the monastery schools. All right, so I have to say that as an Irish person, this joke that Joe Biden made was kind of triggering to me. We get a lot of flack. We get leprechauns. We get, oh my gosh, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Irish need not apply trope in early America. That was a thing. And my understanding is that happened because, the U.S. was a Protestant country. The Irish were Catholic. As such, they had a ton of kids. And the people in the U.S. were genuinely concerned that the Irish would actually outbreed them, which is actually really funny when you think about it. But there literally were signs up saying Irish need not apply. Like, for example, the police the police cars in New York City, I believe, are still called paddy wagons because they were often full of drunk Irishmen because it was so hard for them to find work. And admittedly, I mean, being drunk could be either cause or effect of not being able to work, but either way, it wasn't good. The U.S. did not treat Irish people fairly. You want to talk about some reparations due? Maybe we should think about some of that stuff, but obviously nobody really ever talks about that because Irish people don't have the right amount of pigment in their skin. Anyway, Biden jokes he's really not Irish because he's sober and doesn't have a relative in jail. Well, by that metric, I'm not either, so let's be fair. President Biden told a series of cringeworthy jokes about his Irish ancestry. Maybe that's it. I'm not triggered. I'm cringing. It's really gross. About his Irish ancestry to mark St. Patrick's Day, cracking that he's surprised his distant Irish relatives aren't in jail and that he's really not Irish because he doesn't drink alcohol. Well, he is 80 years old. The 80-year-old president, who is roughly 5/8 Irish, made the seemingly stereotype-laden attempt at humor at as the House Republicans investigate his family's international business deals amid a federal criminal investigation of first son Hunter Biden. More on that later. I've been to Ireland many times, but not to actually look up to find my actual family members, and there are so many, and they actually weren't in jail, Biden said to scattered laughs as he recalled a 6-day visit in which he met his relatives. There's still a place called Finnegan's Pub that's related to my family, he went on. I'm the only Irish you've ever met, though, that's never had a drink, so I'm okay. I'm really not Irish. Yes, you're okay because you're not Irish. Good for you. The president spoke after House Speaker Kevin McCarthy at an annual Friends of Ireland luncheon at the Capitol. McCarthy, who has an Irish ancestry as well, expressed an interest in working together with Biden, recounting how Republican President Ronald Reagan and House Speaker Tip O'Neill managed to do so. I agree with the speaker. There is no reason why we can't find common ground. There's no reason why we can't hope to change this direction of the extremes in both parties are pushing. I agree. The problem is that Biden is the one pushing that extreme. Kevin McCarthy, not so much, not at all. In fact, I feel like most of the time he's not pushing back hard enough at all. I think it's important. I think it's really important, and that's the power of friendship. I think that's the power of, it's the strength of our partnership if we work at it, and simply put, I think it's the Irish of it. Okay. Biden's meandering remarks didn't directly touch on increasing pressure from GOP investigators who say they want to determine the president's role in a series of business ventures dating to his vice presidency and earlier involving his son Hunter and brother James Biden in countries including China, Mexico, Russia, and, you guessed it, Ukraine. Biden declined to host a joint press conference Friday with visiting Irish leaders Leo Varadkar after also declining to do so during other recent visits by world leaders, including the visits of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz on March 3rd and Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva on February 10th. At one point in his remarks Friday, Biden recounted meeting a corrupt Scranton politician leader named Patty as a child, noting humorously that the crooked pole always did what he said he would do. Patty was like a, quote, late Chicago Mayor Richard Daley, brother-in-law on the payroll kind of thing, so nepotism. Biden recalled just a day after House Republicans released bank record information on Biden family income from China to Hunter and James Biden, presidential daughter-in-law Hallie Biden, and also another unnamed Biden. So let's talk about family corruption, Joe. Biden said he couldn't understand how his grandfather, Mr. Rectitude, would invite such a shady character to join the family for lunch. You're wondering why I like Patty? Biden's grandfather supposedly said. He said, let me tell you something. He'd look at you and say, Ambrose, I'm going to cut your heart out. And you'd know he'd mean it, the president recalled. Or, Ambrose, I'm going to jump off a bridge for you. Whatever he said, he'd do. Just remember, do what you say, do what you say. So interesting to hold up a very corrupt politician as a role model. I'm just saying. I just thought this joke was kind of cringeworthy, and I really do think it's kind of unfair to expect Irish people to just have to be fine with everything, especially given the stuff that we could complain about, like the freaking Lucky Charms box. If we're going to get rid of the Lady on the Land of Lakes butter packaging, we should probably also consider getting rid of the little leprechaun on the front of the Lucky Charms. Again, I don't really care. I just think it's important to note that people are held to different standards, and people clearly care more about certain demographics than they do about others. And I am not a member of the alt-right. You guys know this. I think nothing of it. I'm just saying, and everyone is starting to notice that there is actually a very clear anti-white bias in the country right now. And that's really not a good thing. That's actually something that's very heavily present in South Africa, and that way nothing good lies. There is never a good reason to exclude someone on the basis of their race, and that is exactly what this left-leaning ideology is doing. And I've always said you should never criticize someone for something they can't control. And I often say this in connection to people like Michelle Obama, because I am a very tall lady. I'm 5 feet and 11 inches. My feet are size 11. I have huge feet. People would probably say my hands are very mannish. I don't care. I didn't choose any of that stuff. And that's why I don't criticize people like Vladimir Zelensky for being 5'7". He didn't choose that either. And there's a lot better things to criticize him for. Now, Michelle Obama, I don't care what you think she looks like. She's a woman. She had 2 different daughters. I don't care if you can't find a picture of her while she was pregnant. I don't care that people think she looks like a man. I don't think that's nice, and there are much more significant things to criticize her for, like the fact that she said the first time she ever felt proud of this country was when her husband was elected, and the fact that she cried for 30 minutes after Trump was elected because she was so concerned about the lack of diversity on the stage with him. Give me a break. How about we criticize actual real stuff? But the left is intent on only focusing on these external factors, and there's a reason that white people, and yes, Irish people, aren't given actual credence when it comes to complaints about racial disparities and racial discrimination, because that absolutely was a factor in old America. Oh gosh, we got to talk about this. So I don't think I've mentioned the Bethany Mandel thing. She's a friend of mine. I was chatting with her about her book just the other night, right before this happened, or right before this came out. This is a really interesting part of the story that you guys may not know. I'd heard this in passing, but this is actually confirming it. Author who struggled to define woke says liberal host said she effing hates parents in a hot mic moment. And from my understanding, this was before the Rising show on which Bethany was unable to really define wokeness was live. The conservative author who went viral this week for her halting response on defining woke told Fox News Digital her questioner made a disparaging remark about parents on a hot mic before the interview began, effectively throwing her off her game. Now, Bethany, if you guys aren't familiar with her, has, I think, 6 children, either 6 or 8. I cannot keep track. She just had another one recently, so she's sleep deprived. She's recently traveling. All of her kids are all over the place. She's a very busy lady. And to hear that from this parent from this host right before this interview had to be kind of startling and kind of gross. I really don't like that. It would have made me really dislike the host if someone said, I don't like fill in the blank about this person who's coming on to speak with us today. I don't like that at all. That's like me not liking when people make fun of Michelle Obama or Vladimir Zelensky over things they don't control. You can't control how many kids you have, but commenting on what someone chooses to do with their life, also not nice. That's what we saw with the trad wife thing. The conservative author who went viral this week, that's where we started. In an appearance Tuesday on the Hills web service series Rising to promote her new book, Stolen Youth, Bethany Mandel had difficulty responding to a question from co-host Brianna Joy Gray, who I believe is an actual communist, in a clip that racked up millions of views online and jubilant commentary from media progressives, because of course. Would you mind defining woke? It's come up a couple times. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. I believe the actual quote from Brianna Joy Gray was, "What does woke mean to you?" Which I think should have made it a lot easier for Bethany, but Bethany was actually trying to give a real objective definition, not the subjective leftist definition that Brianna was probably looking for. I mean, woke is something that's very hard to define. We spent an entire chapter defining it. It is sort of understanding that we need to totally reimagine and redo society in order to create hierarchies of oppression. Sorry, it's hard to explain in a 15-second soundbite, she said, which I completely agree with. It's kind of an encompassing concept. Asked to elaborate on her accusation, Mandel told Fox News Digital she didn't have a recording, but that Gray, right after Mandel logged on to the remote interview, said something along the lines of, "I effing hate parents," and thought they were narcissists who just wanted small versions of themselves. Mandel, who's just had her 6th child, says she took it as a direct shot and almost couldn't believe what she'd heard. She added Gray's co-host, Robbie Suave, the libertarian senior editor at Reason, replied to Gray, "There are some good ones and some bad ones." That's fair. To Gray, and then moved on before starting the interview. Gray is a left-wing former national press secretary for Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign who has been critical of corporate media and mainstream Democrats. Fair enough, they both deserve criticism. She recalled feeling, this is the worst this has a real possibility of getting really nasty and really personal, which has happened to me a lot over the course of my career. Here she is with 2 of her kids. They are adorable. She's a great lady. And so I logged on thinking, this woman is about to come at me very personally, and I have to be really careful because one day my kids are going to see this and I don't want them to be hurt by whatever she says and whatever I say, she said. And so I have to be very careful, and I was already very anxious when the call started, and you can tell, my goodness, if you watch the whole video, I am anxious from the get-go. Gray and Suave didn't respond to requests for comment. Shocking. Mandel noted as she froze up over the question that it was going to go viral. Indeed, a host of progressive sites and writers picked up the remarks, including the Daily Beast, of course, the Washington Post's Philip Bump, bump on a log, HuffPost, and the New York Daily News. She was also mocked on Twitter by liberal media figures like NBC's Ben Collins and 1619 Project founder Nicole Hannah-Jones. Oh, wonderful. She says a bit of backstory. Just before we went on, Brianna Joy Gray has a hot mic. I heard her demeaning parents in general in colorful and nasty terms, stating parents only have kids in order to perpetuate their own narcissism. And Robbie said there are some good ones, some bad ones, right? Of course, libertarian take. Liberals also derided Mandel's explanation on Wednesday. Former Andrew Cuomo and Lindsey Boylan tweeted that I've only been treated with respect as a mother by Brianna. Okay, so she's literally challenging all of her assertions. How does Lindsey know what Bethany heard? She doesn't. And this isn't to say that Brianna Joy Gray did not then go on to treat Bethany with relative respect, but saying that right before an interview of a mother of 6 is incredibly demeaning and has to be calculated. Well, it would have been calculated if she'd known she'd be overheard. If it was a hot mic moment, it was just really genuinely the way she felt, and still really made the environment of the interview very hostile. Far-left writer Jamila Hill praised Gray's questions, saying it was why she tells journalism students that open-ended questions are better than questions that sound tough. When conservatives first hijacked woke, every journalist should have asked them to define it, because these meltdowns would have happened a lot. To be fair, and I told Bethany this myself, I said, I'm very sorry that this happened at your expense, but I really think it's time for conservatives to figure out what exactly woke means, because we talk about it all the time. And I think that at this point, it kind of is cover for, it's someone I don't like. And I don't like that idea. That's not critical thinking. That's not like fully engaging with what's actually there. So we need to determine exactly what it means, and we need to be able to explain it at the drop of a hat. And I know it sucks to be put on the spot like that, but I'm really glad that it was brought to everyone's attention, and hopefully everyone's brushing up on it now. The Daily Show correspondent Roy Wood Jr. also made light of the clip in a sketch from the show's Twitter account. In the video, he pretended to be disarming a bomb where the password to disarm it was the definition of the word woke, and Mandel could not help him. She acknowledged she was rattled by what she said and Gray's remarks before the interview. It was very deer in the headlights, Mandel said. I could see the next 24 hours, and I saw in that moment, as I was right, like she was talking on camera a few seconds before on a hot mic, and I was rattled. I compared it to someone shining a light in your eyes right before you're about to shoot a free throw, and you just choke. And that's exactly what I did, unfortunately. She called the moment humanizing, adding she hopes the dust up doesn't distract from the book's success. Actually, I wanted to reassure her for sure, too, because all publicity is, in fact, good publicity. And people think I'm crazy for saying this, but it's true, unfortunately. People will notice bad publicity and they'll be like, oh my gosh, you're the person that did X, huh? And if you're selling a book, I honestly couldn't think of a better way to get it out there. I think that's really actually kind of cool. A lot of free advertising was given. So this kerfuffle, I think, will pay off for Bethany in the end. Yes, she noted it's reached number 20 on the Amazon nonfiction bestseller list. That's awesome. I hope having 6 kids makes me realize that there are worse things in the world, and I feel like I let my co-author down because this is what people are talking about, and I don't want to be in the conversation because our book today, Amazon just released that we're in the top 20, she said. Stolen Youth, How Radicals Are Erasing Innocence and Indoctrinating a Generation was written by Mandel and New York Post columnist Carol Markowitz. It provides what it calls an urgent deep dive into issues surrounding the current woke indoctrination happening in politics, education, medicine, mental health, entertainment, and culture, and how parents can go on the offense to protect our kids. Lovely picture of Bethany. She said she should have been able to articulate a better answer to Gray's question. In that moment, I was human and I screwed up, she said, but I need to explain that, and I think people are owed that explanation if I'm going to be taken seriously as someone who's written a best-selling book on the subject, which I have. Mandel said so-called wokeness is reimagining the world for children in a way that puts a sharp focus on equity and race while also redefining gender. There's a lot of academic definitions of woke that are constantly changing. That's right. This is postmodernism in action. Postmodernism loves defying definition. And the title of this video that I saw from Bethany Mandel was that conservatives hate defining wokeness. I'm like, they don't. You, B words, love the fact that it's hard to define. You thrive on that. That means it's almost impossible for people to truly hit it where it counts. I think that it's this ongoing challenge to truly pin stuff down like this is part of what keeps conservatives sharp. It's important that we be able to do it. It's important that we know it needs to be done. And I'm glad that Bethany's misfortune is our wake-up call that we need to get really, really familiar with what exactly it means. You know it when you see it, she added. We can see young men competing in women's swimming competitions. That is wokeness personified. I agree. I actually probably would have, if I were put on the spot like that, I probably would have said something along the lines of, well, you know how they used to define sexually explicit material? I'm not sure how to phrase it, but you know it when you see it. I think that's a fair analysis. That's a good summary for sure. Somebody else defined it as authoritarian utopianism, which I thought was great too. Woke is an old word, psychological from Sigmund Freud. Fascinating. Stuart Walker says, HuffPost, yuck, yeah, I dislike Daily Beast more, honestly. Keenan says, this seems like my personal rant got picked up from a female point of view. That's a good show. That's awesome. This is a good show. Oh, I'm happy to hear that. Yeah, I think wokeness really demands definition for sure. Andy says, public service announcement, when you bring your laptop to a repair shop, read the fine print on the contract you signed. That's the next thing we're going to talk about to see how quickly we can go through it. Dude that assassinated McKinley was woke. LOL. Interesting. Thank you, Casey. Andy then goes on to say, if you get high on crack and forget you ever had a laptop after a very long period of time, it becomes 100% the property of the shop. Of course, and that I'm sure it doesn't surprise me at all that the fine print says, if you leave this here for too long, it's ours. Like de facto, it belongs to us now. But that's not what Hunter Biden thinks. So let's go through a quick timeline of the Hunter Biden laptop because as we can see from this article from Politico from 2020, Hunter Biden's story is Russian disinfo. Dozens of former intel officials say. More than 50. Wow, that's so many. And they're intelligence officials. It's in the name, guys. It's like Antifa. They hate fascism. If you are anti-Antifa, you are pro-fascism. Duh. If you're anti-intelligence official, you're pro-dumbness. Duh. Just kidding. We know this is not the case now. We certainly knew it back then, too. More than 50 former intelligence officials signed a letter casting doubt on the provenance of a New York Post story on the former vice president's son. Wow, that's crazy. I can't imagine the intelligence officials saying that. Well, I see they have no added addendum, so no appending here. They're not clarifying that their story was completely wrong. So let's see what happened next. That one is from October 2020. Here we have also from October 2020, Hunter Biden laptop claims 5 fast facts you need to know. This is from Andy Biggs from Arizona 5th District. Here's what the breakdown is. John Paul McIsaac, a Trump supporter, brought forward the laptop claims. That is correct. Laptop contains emails that people allege show Joe Biden was involved with a Ukrainian energy firm executive. Well, we caught him on camera talking about how they had to fire this guy or else he wouldn't give them American funds. So I'm pretty sure that is correct on every count. An FBI agent's signature may appear on a subpoena that could relate to the laptop. We'll see more on that later. Some have accused the computer repair shop owner of contradictions, and others claim Photoshop might have been used in the photos, yet others think it's a double standard. So here we have from Chris Ergel, whoever that is, probably a journalist, today's bogus October surprise is brought to you by Murdoch-owned tabloid NY Post on behalf of Trump campaign's very own Rudy Giuliani. I will share hilariously bad bits and research, both mine and others, debunking Giuliani's pet disinfo campaign through the day. They're really sloppy. They needed to hide something in that photo and used the clone tool to fill it in. Then they added the glare effect to hide it, but they didn't get all of it. Do you see it? And this is from Chris from the same thread, it sounds like. Some say the laptop might be a Russian disinformation campaign, but the Director of National Intelligence disputes that claim. All right. That's also from October 2020. So let's move on in time. Here we have September 2021. The Hunter Biden laptop is confirmed? Color us shocked, to the New York Post, who got locked out of their Twitter account for, I believe, over a year, literally just for reporting on this topic. And this actually came up during the course of the Twitter files as well. They were like, hey, you know what? We got to quash this Hunter Biden story. We need to pretend it was Russian disinformation, get the New York Post off the site, and it'll die. And indeed it did. And there were a lot of people after the election who said if they'd known about Hunter Biden's laptop, they probably wouldn't have voted for Joe Biden, which was really kind of telling to me. I was like, oh, wow, this actually worked. I bet they're really glad that they did this. In his new book, The Bidens Inside the First Family's 50-Year Rise to Power, Politico reporter Ben Schreckinger said that the evidence points to Hunter Biden's laptop being legit. While we appreciate the support, the truth is that the Post reports have always been true, and it's only because the media wants to protect Joe Biden that they keep referring to the laptop as unsubstantiated. Schreckinger, great last name, notes that a person who had independent access to Hunter Biden's email confirms 2 of the emails the Post published, including one about a potential deal with China with the line 10 held by H for the big guy, that is, Joe Biden. But Hunter Biden's former business partner, Tony Bobulinski, already said those emails were authentic. The media just ignored him. Schreckinger adds the emails released by the Swedish government also match emails from the laptop. Hunter had gotten into a kerfuffle when he was staying in a Swedish embassy building. That's also been reported. Oh, here he is in the bathtub. These pictures are just, I hate them so much. I saw way too much of them at the time. For those who doubt that Hunter was just forget a laptop at a repair shop, more on that later, Schreckinger notes that Biden's son abandoned another computer at the home of psychiatrist Keith Abloh. So he's done it before, and he probably did it even after that, and before that. Feds seized that machine when they raided Abloh over abuse claims. Hunter eventually got it back. Of course he did. These were the feds. These are his friends. I wasn't keeping tabs on possessions very well for about a 4-year period of time, Hunter said. So he admits he wasn't keeping track of anything very well because he was constantly high. All this information is out there, yet the Times still called the laptop unsubstantiated last week until it quietly corrected the story. And even as Politico credited its reporter, it added, while the leak contains genuine files, it remains possible that fake material has been slipped in. Which part? The pictures of Hunter smoking crack? Schreckinger called the White House to check whether, as we reported, Joe Biden met Hunter for a dinner in April 2015 that included Burisma advisor Vadim Porashki, I don't know, I'm just making stuff up at this point. It's Polish-sounding Ukrainian. Biden's team pointed him to a Washington Post fact check, which noted that Biden's team had at first said there was no record of such a meeting until they finally conceded that, yes, Joe did drop in on that dinner. That's crazy. The fact confirmed that the writer still includes haughtily that there's less to the story than one might imagine. I imagine there is less than you want there to be, right? It's a perfect example of how Democrats weaponize fact checkers to deflect criticism and enlist social media to censor articles. Nothing to see here. See the Wuhan lab leak theory. Good point. Consider the level of skepticism brought to bear here. Biden's team lied to us, but we'll take them at their word that nothing of consequence happened at this dinner. Email after email, picture after picture are proved authentic from the laptop, but hey, maybe some of it's fake. The laptop is unsubstantiated because the media doesn't want it to be substantiated. We figure that won't change, but thanks, Mr. Schreckinger, for at least bucking the trend. Interesting. All right. Here we have from March 2022, Washington Post joins New York Times in finally admitting emails from Hunter Biden laptop are real. So they admit that the laptop is in fact substantiated, and they go on to admit that emails from it are substantiated, and then they go on to say Hunter Biden himself finally admits infamous laptop is his as he pleads for a criminal probe. So once Hunter figured that he couldn't get away with this, that the media wasn't going to be able to sweep this directly under the rug, he started to look at investigating the people who looked into his laptop, which is mind-blowing arrogance. Like, I genuinely don't really have the words to express how I feel about his take on this. Let's read about this. So much for the laptop could be mine. First son Hunter Biden's lawyers admitted late Wednesday that the infamous laptop that the now 52-year-old abandoned at a Delaware computer repair shop is in the throes of his crack cocaine addiction does indeed belong to him. The revelation came in a petition letter from Hunter's lawyers seeking a criminal probe into what they called attempts to weaponize its contents. Okay, so it is mine, but they're trying to weaponize its contents. Oh my gosh. Okay, so it wasn't photoshopped. This is all real. And how would we weaponize it other than by raising an eyebrow on it and putting a little bit of sunlight on it? In a 14-page letter to Delaware Attorney General Kathy Jennings, Biden's attorney Ab Lowell claimed that repair shop owner John Paul MacIsaac unlawfully accessed Hunter's laptop data and worked with former President Donald Trump's personal lawyer Rudy Giuliani to weaponize sordid and incriminating contents on it against Joe Biden. If Joe Biden has evidence that he's been compromised by his son, it's not weaponizing to ask questions about it, and it's certainly not weaponizing it to say, you know what, there is a serious issue of compromised national security here, which is exactly what Rudy Giuliani was asking. This failed, dirty political trick directly resulted in the exposure, exploitation, and manipulation of Mr. Biden's private and personal information, Lowell wrote. Maybe you shouldn't have abandoned your laptop at a freaking computer repair shop. Mr. MacIsaacs' intentional, reckless, and unlawful conduct allowed for hundreds of gigabytes of Mr. Biden's personal data without any discretion to be circulated all around the internet. Translation, mainstream media didn't have control of it first and wasn't able to censor it how they wanted it to be censored. MacIsaac took possession of the laptop and hard drive late in 2019 after trying and failing for months to notify Hunter that the device was ready to be picked up. Once the shop owner saw the laptop's contents, including emails detailing influence peddling involving then Vice President Joe Biden and videos of the younger Biden smoking crack and having relations with prostitutes, as his work subordinates, he alerted the FBI. The feds picked up the laptop in December 2019, but not before MacIsaac made a copy and gave it to Giuliani's personal lawyer, Robert Costello. Giuliani provided the Post with a copy of the hard drive in November 2020. Lowell's letter singles out MacIsaac, Giuliani, Costello, former Trump White House advisor Steve Bannon, former Trump White House aide Garrett Ziegler, Bannon associate Jack Maxey, and Yakov Appelbaum, founder and CEO of cyber analytics firm XR Vision, and former aide to Senator Ron Johnson, as parties who gained unauthorized access to the laptop's contents and disseminated it to the media and lawmakers. We believe the facts and circumstances merit further investigation as to whether the conduct of Messrs. MacIsaac, Costello, Giuliani, Bannon, etc. violated several provisions of Delaware criminal code, including but not necessarily limited to computer-related property offenses. Doubt if Hunter Biden signed the form, he signed the form, and that piece of property was functionally his because it was abandoned. Sorry, MacIsaacs. It was functionally the owner of the computer shops, not Hunter's anymore. So that was from, I want to say just the other day, February 1st. Right. Okay. And then here we are, Hunter Biden seeking federal probe of Trump allies over laptop. Right. Because he can't be the only one who goes down with the ship. Very interesting. I'm not going to read this whole thing. We can just see the trail from it's not a real laptop, this is all Russian disinformation, to it is mine and you're in trouble for looking at it directly, like over the course of 3 years. Has been crazy to me, but I just want to catch you guys all up on all of that stuff. Thank you very much, Stuart. If you want to read about Antifa and communism, then read Mr. Norris Changes Trains by Christopher Isherwood, set in 1930s Berlin. That sounds amazing. I'll have to see if I can get that from the library. I just got a library card here and I'm looking forward to using it. All right, you guys, it is after 7. I'm going to read a few of your comments and then we'll wrap it because Andy and I have to go see a man about a parade, and that's going to be a lot of fun for sure. Stuart Walker says, lack of diversity. When was there ever an orange person as president before Trump? Just joking. Yeah, I completely agree. Yes, Trump, the original OG, orange glow. I completely agree. Yes, Andy links my conversation with Bethany in our Twitter spaces. That was a lot of fun. She's a great lady. Really, really good role model material, and happy for her having 6 kids. Greg points out, stop replacement of gingers in kids' movies. Yes, it's been happening a lot. This is in fact something one of our friends from Timcast was talking about on his show, Pop Culture Crisis, talking about how all of the gingers are turning into typically African-American kids. And I was just wondering why, because gingers are actually one of the smallest minorities in the world, and they're on their way to extinction. The red hair genes are incredibly recessive, and they're very likely to disappear over the course of just the next maybe 100 years. So certainly something that we could roll with. We should have more redheads instead of fewer. I agree. Everybody smile says smile. Everybody, appreciate that. KC says the Irish joke should have been about corruption. Indeed, possibly so. Keenan says, sorry I'm late. I am too. Glad you're here now. I went on another weird rant about the morality of men and women that isn't YouTube friendly. It took a while this time. Indeed. Sounds good to me. I appreciate good rants. Stuart says 5'8" Irish. Definitely not a leprechaun. No, he's far too tall to be a leprechaun. Which is greater, abandoned Hunter laptop or function Sleepy Joe brain cells? I think the combination of the two is going to be pretty incriminating for Joe freaking Biden. Keenan says only CNN is allowed to look at classified information. I agree. I think that's a problem. Username says, I ran a custom framing shop. We had a policy that if an order wasn't picked up after 90 days, it became store property. All we'd ever do was hang up the abandoned pieces or leave them in the back. Yes, so I saw something from a lady who made cakes. And she said, I tried to get a hold of this customer. She didn't get back to me. Her cake was supposed to be picked up today, and now it's getting stale and old and gross. And she said then she hit me up later and she's like, hey, I want to come pick it up tomorrow. She's like, okay, well, I have it, but it's going to be kind of old now. And then she never came and got it. And she's like, okay, well, I have a really hard time now because I custom made this piece of food, this piece of a baked good, and now she's not going to come get it. So I really don't know what to do with it. But I was like, yeah, it's really tough when customers don't come and pick up what they dropped off or what they requested or what they personally ordered. So definitely something that we should definitely be keeping an eye on going forward. Very curious to see what happens with that particular laptop. All right, you guys, my voice is going out. I'm going to go make sure Andy gets his serving of corned beef, cabbage, carrots, and potatoes. And I will see you all on Monday. I think we're going to be switching up the studio. We're certainly going to be switching up you know what? We're going to see you guys tomorrow. Andy and I are doing a live stream sometime tomorrow morning. Not sure what time yet. So make sure you join us there. It'll probably be, I don't want to promise, but I'm thinking probably about 10 a.m. We'll see what happens. Yes, Andy will be there with me. He said he would. We always have a great time chatting about all of the different things. We'll probably be talking about plans we have for the studio and for our little YouTube channel as a whole. All right, you guys, I will see you then. Until next time, bye guys. How's it going?